Picture this: the golden era of rock, the 1970s, when the music industry was bursting with raw talent. Stadiums were filled to the brim with screaming fans, and the lines between friendship and rivalry blurred under the weight of fame. Among the stars of that age, few shined as brightly as Peter Frampton, the guitar virtuoso whose live album Frampton Comes Alive turned him into an overnight sensation. But behind the dazzling success, behind the million-dollar record deals and the charming smile, lay a world of conflicts, betrayals, and secrets that would come to haunt him. Today, Ringo Starr, one of the few remaining rock icons who had stood by Frampton's side, has finally spoken out. His words have sent shockwaves through the industry, exposing a darker side of the man who was once one of the most celebrated musicians of his generation. Think of this: two rock legends standing together under the glow of stage lights, united by music and a shared history of success. Ringo Starr, the former Beatle who had become the glue holding together the legacy of rock's most influential band, and Peter Frampton, the golden boy of the 70s, whose face was plastered on every music magazine in the world. But even the strongest alliances in rock history can fracture, and theirs did, spectacularly. Their conflict wasn't just about music. It was personal. It was about loyalty and betrayal, about a man who seemingly had it all but made choices that drove away even his closest friends. Starr had long supported Frampton, inviting him to play in his all-star band, giving him a stage when the spotlight of his solo career had begun to dim. But something changed. There were whispers of Frampton's arrogance, of his refusal to acknowledge those who had helped him along the way, of a rock star who had let his ego consume him. Behind closed doors, tensions flared. Starr, a man who had seen it all in the music industry, had little patience for Frampton's attitude. What had once been mutual respect turned into cold indifference. The camaraderie was gone, replaced by frustration and disappointment. The final blow came when Starr, after years of loyalty, had enough. Their friendship dissolved, another casualty of the cutthroat world of rock and roll. Peter Frampton's biggest enemy wasn't just other musicians, it was the very industry that had turned him into a star. In the mid-70s, Frampton Comes Alive became one of the best-selling live albums of all time, catapulting him to stratospheric fame overnight. But what happens when you climb too high too fast? The crash is inevitable. Frampton's managers, eager to capitalize on his success, pushed him into a whirlwind of commercial projects, stripping away the very thing that made him great, his artistry. Albums like I'm In You, 1977, were manufactured for mass appeal, abandoning the raw, authentic sound that had made Frampton a legend. Fans noticed. Critics pounced. The once beloved rock god was now being mocked as a sellout, a man who had traded true rock and roll for pop ballads and commercial gimmicks. The industry turned its back on him. The same record executives who had once praised him now saw him as a product that had lost its value. He had been used, discarded, and left to watch as his career crumbled before his eyes. Picture this: the spotlight blazes, the crowd roars, and Peter Frampton stands at the pinnacle of his career. His golden locks shimmer under the stage lights, his guitar wailing like a cry from the soul. But beyond the applause, beyond the adoring fans, there was a different soundtrack playing, a bitter, discordant melody of fractured friendships, bruised egos, and betrayals that lingered long after the final encore. As Frampton's star ascended, it seemed the higher he climbed, the more people he left in the shadows below. At the heart of Frampton's tangled web of conflicts was his tumultuous relationship with Steve Marriott, his former bandmate from Humble Pie. They weren't just colleagues, they were brothers in arms, forging a path through the wild terrain of the late 1960s rock scene. Marriott's gritty, soulful vocals perfectly complemented Frampton's melodic guitar wizardry, creating a sound that was raw, powerful, and revolutionary. Together, they were unstoppable, or so it seemed. But fame has a cruel way of exposing the cracks beneath even the strongest foundations. As Humble Pie began to rise, Frampton grew restless. The creative spark that had ignited their partnership was now smothered by clashing egos and diverging artistic visions. Frampton, ever the perfectionist, felt stifled by Marriott's dominant, often erratic leadership. Marriott, on the other hand, viewed Frampton's ambition as an act of betrayal, a selfish grab for the spotlight at the expense of the band that had nurtured him. When Frampton announced his departure in 1971, it wasn't just a professional split, it was a personal rupture. Marriott was furious, blindsided by what he saw as an abandonment at the height of their potential. Their final days together were marked by explosive arguments, doors slammed in anger, and harsh words that echoed long after Frampton walked away. The betrayal cut deep, and though years passed, the wound never healed. Marriott carried that bitterness to his grave, dying in a tragic house fire in 1991, with their conflict unresolved, a ghost that would haunt Frampton's legacy forever. If Frampton's fallout with Marriott was personal, his feud with Keith Richards was pure, unfiltered rock and roll rivalry. In the early days of his solo career, Frampton found himself welcomed into the exclusive inner circle of the Rolling Stones. The band admired his talent, even inviting him to jam during recording sessions. For young Frampton, it was a dream come true, until that dream turned into a nightmare. As Frampton's fame exploded with Frampton Comes Alive, so did his ego. No longer the eager, humble guitarist looking to learn from the greats, he became the golden boy of rock, gracing magazine covers and basking in the adulation of millions. This didn't sit well with Richards, the ultimate rock rebel, who despised anything that reeked of commercial polish or manufactured success. The tension between them was palpable. Richards, never one to mince words, mocked Frampton's music in interviews, dismissing it as soft rock for people who don't like real rock. He sneered at Frampton's clean-cut image, calling it too pretty for rock and roll, a thinly veiled jab at both his appearance and his perceived lack of grit. Frampton, wounded but too proud to show it, fired back with passive-aggressive jabs about the Stones being stuck in the past. Their feud simmered for years, a toxic mix of jealousy, artistic snobbery, and wounded pride playing out in the press and backstage at industry events. They'd pass each other at award shows with icy glares and forced smiles, their brief, tense interactions a far cry from the camaraderie they'd once shared. And then there was David Bowie, the man who had known Frampton long before the fame, the fortune, and the fallouts. They were schoolmates, bonded by a shared love of music and a rebellious spirit. Set apart from their peers, their friendship survived the turbulence of early adulthood, with Bowie's meteoric rise paralleling Frampton's steady climb. But fame changes everything. When Bowie invited Frampton to join him on the Glass Spider Tour in 1987, it seemed like a reunion of kindred spirits. But behind the dazzling stage production and their electric performances, tensions simmered. Bowie, ever the charismatic frontman, had a magnetic presence that naturally dominated the stage. Frampton, used to being the center of attention in his solo career, found himself relegated to the role of just the guitarist, his ego bruised by the realization that he was no longer the star. There were whispers of jealousy, of Frampton resenting how effortlessly Bowie commanded the spotlight. Backstage, their once easy camaraderie grew strained. Frampton felt overshadowed, reduced to a supporting act in a show where he believed he deserved equal billing. Bowie, focused on the artistic vision of the tour, was oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to Frampton's growing frustration. Their friendship, once rooted in genuine affection, became a fragile truce, strained by unspoken resentments and the complex dynamics of power and fame. While they remained cordial in public, the warmth of their early bond was gone, replaced by a polite distance that never quite bridged the gap left by their divergent paths. The common thread in all these fractured relationships was Frampton himself. His relentless ambition, combined with the intoxicating effects of fame, created a cycle of connection and disconnection, a man who craved meaningful relationships but often sabotaged them with his own insecurities and pride. As his career soared, Frampton's inner circle grew smaller. Friends became acquaintances, and acquaintances became distant memories. The very success he had dreamed of became the barrier between him and the people who mattered most. His need for validation through fame left little room for vulnerability, for admitting mistakes, for simply being human. And perhaps that's the greatest tragedy of Peter Frampton's story. Behind the dazzling smile, the iconic guitar riffs, and the stadium anthems was a man haunted by the friendships he'd lost, the the bridges he'd burned, and the people he'd left behind in the relentless pursuit of something that, in the end, couldn't fill the void. But perhaps the greatest battle Peter Frampton fought was with himself. The rise to fame had been exhilarating, but the fall was devastating. The adoration of millions had been replaced with whispers of irrelevance. His albums no longer topped the charts, his tours were no longer selling out, and the industry had moved on. Desperate to cope, Frampton turned to alcohol and prescription pills, numbing the pain of watching his dreams slip away. The charming golden-haired rock god was now a shadow of his former self, struggling to keep his career and life intact. His personal relationships suffered, marriages crumbled, friendships faded, and the once celebrated musician found himself isolated, trapped in the silence that followed when the music stopped playing. The fans had left. The industry had left. Even some of his closest allies had distanced themselves. There were moments when it seemed like he might not make it back, when the weight of regret, addiction, and self-doubt threatened to swallow him whole. Frampton's story is not just one of fame and downfall, but of a man forced to confront his own demons, the arrogance, the betrayals, the unchecked ambition. It had all come back to haunt him. Today, Ringo Starr's words serve as a painful reminder of the fractures Frampton left behind. But is his legacy truly tarnished, or is it a cautionary tale of the dangers of fame, ego, and the music industry's ruthless machine? Peter Frampton may never fully escape the shadows of his past, but one thing is certain: his story is as dramatic and unforgettable as the music that once made the world fall in love with him. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more celebrity lifestyle content.